In hospitals across China, during the late summer of 2008, desperate parents began rushing their babies in for emergency medical examinations. The symptoms were strikingly similar. The infants cried uncontrollably, developed fevers, struggled to urinate, and in many cases, had blood in their urine. Medical imaging revealed something extraordinarily rare for babies that young: kidney stones. It was a condition almost never seen in healthy infants, yet it was suddenly appearing by the thousands in nearly every province across the country. By the end of the crisis, nearly 300,000 children had been diagnosed with some degree of kidney damage. More than 54,000 required hospitalization, and at least 6 babies lost their lives. The cause was something these children consumed every single day, several times a day, from the earliest months of their lives: the powdered infant formula they depended on for nourishment. If you've heard about this case before, you already know it is still considered one of the largest food safety scandals in recent history. If this is your first time learning about it, prepare yourself. The investigation behind this disaster involves corporate cover-ups, political pressure, and an entire industry willing to look the other way in the pursuit of higher profits. If you're interested in investigations like this, don't forget to like the video. It really helps the channel continue growing and bringing you stories like this. In the early 2000s, China experienced a boom in the use of infant formula. As the country's economy expanded and its urban middle class grew, more and more families replaced traditional breastfeeding with powdered formula, which was widely seen as a modern and scientifically advanced way to feed babies. The market grew rapidly within just a few years, and dozens of companies competed aggressively for shelf space. Among them was Sanlu, one of the largest dairy manufacturers in China, headquartered in Hebei province. To keep up with that rapid growth, infant formula manufacturers needed enormous quantities of raw milk every day. The milk was purchased through a vast network of small dairy farmers and middlemen spread across rural areas of the country. It was within that supply chain, long, loosely regulated, and under constant pressure to deliver large volumes at the lowest possible cost, that a silent problem began to take shape, months before the first babies showed any symptoms. The first complaints reached Sanlu as early as December 2007. Concerned parents reported unusual health problems affecting their babies. Months later, in July 2008, hospitals in Gansu province officially notified the Chinese Ministry of Health about an unusual increase in kidney stone cases among young children, a diagnosis rare enough to immediately catch the attention of experienced pediatricians. While reviewing the cases, a pediatric urologist at a children's hospital noticed that nearly every affected infant had been fed the same brand of infant formula. That information reached the National Quality Supervision Agency, but for months it did not result in any public action. Meanwhile, inside Sanlu, an internal team had already been investigating customer complaints since May 2008, without disclosing its findings outside the company. Doctors in different parts of the country were now asking the same urgent question: why were so many babies, with no connection to one another other than the brand of formula they consumed, developing the same rare condition at the same time? The answer seemed too obvious to ignore. Every affected infant had been fed Sanlu infant formula, but identifying the brand was only the first step, not the complete explanation. Infant formula is normally subjected to strict quality testing before reaching the market, including tests that measure protein content, one of the most basic indicators of nutritional value. The batches produced by Sanlu appeared to be passing those quality tests without any problems. That left investigators, and the company itself, facing an uncomfortable contradiction. How could a product that repeatedly passed quality inspections also be making babies sick on a nationwide scale? The answer only began to emerge when investigators shifted their focus away from the finished product and started examining the testing process itself. They suspected that somewhere within the supply chain, someone had found a way to manipulate the very test that was supposed to guarantee the milk's safety. Once uncovered, the fraud was both simple and deeply disturbing. Middlemen who purchased raw milk from small dairy farmers and resold it to large dairy companies, such as Sanlu, discovered that they could dilute the milk with water, increasing the volume and boosting their profits. They then concealed the dilution by adding a chemical called melamine, a substance commonly used in the production of plastics, adhesives, and fertilizers. Melamine had one characteristic that made it especially useful for fraud. It contains a high concentration of nitrogen, and the standard quality tests used to measure protein in milk actually measured nitrogen levels indirectly, assuming that all of the nitrogen in the sample came from genuine milk protein. By adding melamine, suppliers could make diluted, low-quality milk appear to contain the same amount of protein as high-quality whole milk. In some Sanlu products, melamine concentrations exceeded 2,500 milligrams per kilogram, a level dozens of times higher than what health authorities consider even remotely safe for human consumption. Inside a baby's body, melamine behaves in an especially dangerous way. The chemical accumulates in the kidneys, and when it combines with another compound that was also commonly found in adulterated milk, it forms tiny crystals that develop into kidney stones capable of partially or completely blocking the urinary tract. In infants, whose kidneys are still developing and whose bodies consume a proportionally large amount of formula every day, the damage was even more severe than it would have been in an adult. Many parents describe babies crying nonstop, struggling to urinate, developing high fevers, and showing obvious signs of severe abdominal pain. Because infants are too young to explain what they are feeling, many families did not realize how serious the situation was until days of silent suffering had already passed. In August 2008, while the country's attention was focused on the Beijing Olympic Games, Sanlu chose to notify local authorities quietly, remove products from distributors without announcing a public recall, and limit national media coverage as much as possible in order to avoid damaging the country's image during one of the most important events in its recent history. When the full story finally came to light, it became clear that there was no single person responsible. Instead, the disaster resulted from an entire chain of bad decisions, each one reinforcing the next. At the lowest level of that chain were the middlemen who bought raw milk from small dairy farmers and added melamine before selling it to major dairy manufacturers, motivated solely by the extra profits the fraud generated. But Sanlu had known about the problem since May 2008, a full 4 months before any public recall was announced. Instead of warning consumers or health authorities openly, the company chose to handle the issue internally. Political pressure surrounding the Beijing Olympic Games, which took place between August and early September 2008, created an additional incentive for officials and company executives to avoid becoming responsible for a major food safety scandal just before one of the most important events in the country's recent history. It was not until September 11, 2008, that Sanlu finally announced a public recall of 700 tons of infant formula. Only after that did the State Council of China officially confirm that the contamination was widespread, revealing that products from at least 22 different dairy companies had also been contaminated with melamine. The final toll of the crisis was devastating. About 300,000 children were diagnosed with some degree of kidney damage. More than 54,000 were hospitalized, and at least 6 deaths were officially linked to the contamination. Once the scandal became public, the Chinese government responded quickly and harshly. The head of the country's National Quality Supervision Agency resigned. Sanlu was declared bankrupt at the end of 2008, and 21 people connected to the scheme were brought to trial. Tian Wenhua, the former chairwoman and general manager of Sanlu, was sentenced to life in prison for producing and selling adulterated products. 2 men directly involved in manufacturing and selling the melamine used in the fraud were sentenced to death and executed in November 2009. The scandal also had international consequences. Contaminated Chinese dairy products were found in exports shipped to multiple countries, triggering recalls around the world, and damaging the reputation of China's food industry for years. Even today, many Chinese parents still prefer to buy imported infant formula, despite the higher cost. More than 15 years after the scandal came to light, the loss of trust has never fully disappeared. What makes this case so unforgettable is not just the number of victims or the court sentences. It is the unsettling question it leaves behind. How many similar frauds, somewhere in the world, have still not been discovered?